Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. We are so excited to be back after a month-long break over Christmas and New Year's and kicking off 2018 with a really exciting series of shows. Just a quick reminder that if you're a fan of the show, you can support us on Patreon. Not only are you supporting the production of the World Wanderers podcast, but you also get awesome bonuses like postcards from around the world, one-on-one hangouts with Ryan and myself, copies of all of our ebooks, and so much more. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can head on over to patreon.com/The World Wanderers.
All right, now to the episode. Today we are talking with Jared Schwitzke. Jared is a fellow traveler and the marketing manager of a cool travel startup called Airmule. We'll dive into what Airmule is. But the reason we had Jared on the show is because we're starting a series of episodes where we're interviewing people around the topic of travel and entrepreneurship. So if you've listened to the podcast, you know about our backstory and how we kind of gone through a pretty traditional career route. We had gone to college, gotten jobs, we had traveled after college, and then we reached a point where we both quit our jobs. We went and spent 6 months traveling, and that really changed a lot of the ways we were pursuing life and our direction, not only like personally, but with our careers as well. And since that time, we found that a lot of the self-direction, the excitement, a lot of the positive things that we loved about travel can also be found in kind of pursuing a more entrepreneurial career path. So we thought it'd be fun to dive into that more with some people who have had similar journeys and have taken similar paths. So Jared has an interesting story that as we find out when we talk more and hear about it, some cool experiences with travel leading to a career change. And now he's working in a startup that is in the travel industry, Airmule, which does some cool stuff around shipping that you'll find out more about when we actually dive into it in the episode. But without further ado, let's get into the episode with Jared Schwitzke. All right, we are very excited to be joined on the podcast today by Jared Schwitzke. Jared is the marketing manager of a very cool travel startup called Airmule, which we'll dive deeper into later. Jared, first of all, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here today and be chatting with you about, travel and then also working for a company that does a very travel related thing.
Yeah.
So we had a conversation previously, and we were talking, and we kind of, as we were talking and hearing a bit more about your background and your kind of career evolution and experience of the travel, we realized there was quite a bit of parallel with our story. Jumping out of college into a career, feeling a bit maybe disenchanted with that and having experience. So could you kind of walk us through the first stage of your career and then deciding to leave and go take a big trip?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all started, I went to, it's important to note that I went to high school, college, preschool, everything, from birth to 18 years old. It was all within about 2 hours of each other. So after graduation, I wanted to get as far away from South Carolina as I can, just to possibly see the rest of the country and experience something else. So I took this job. It might not have been sort of the best career move or what I wanted to do, but it was a decently paying job in Colorado, which is a beautiful state. So I figured, hey, let's jump on this. I'll let the whole career thing figure itself out later. Fast forward 3 to 4 years in that, I was working at a tech company in Silicon Valley, very unhappy with what I had been sort of doing. It just, it's that quintessential quarter life crisis, if you will. And I had never really left the country before. And I had a lot of friends who were taking these 2-month vacations and were always going to these beautiful destinations. And, of course, with Instagram and Facebook, you're reminded of that every single day. So here I am at a job I'm unhappy with, seeing people, having the times of their lives in sort of other countries and everything like that. So at the ripe young age of 25 years old, I finally ended up getting my passport, and I went on this 2-month vacation that my boss graciously allowed me to do. So I went on this 2-month vacation, and when I got back from it, it sounds very unoriginal to say, but I was a bit of a changed man. I think before that trip, I had really only planned on climbing this corporate ladder and eventually making my way to an executive level position, and work was my life. And that was really all I cared about. And that was it. It was finances, this and that, strategic investing, blah, blah, all this sort of routine, monotonous, details that you can get into when you're, starting out your career. And then when I got back from that trip, I couldn't have cared less about that. All I wanted to do was travel every single place that I could. I wanted to meet as many strangers as I could in other countries. I wanted to experience all of the cuisines, visit all of the cultures, hang out with people in hostels. That's really the only thing I wanted to do. So since that trip, which was about a year and a half or 2 years ago, since then, it's been, I've been on a tear. I've been to about 15 countries. And then I eventually found my way to Airmule. I figured that I love travel. I want this to be something that is a part of my life, and I want my work to reflect that. So I started looking for jobs, and then ultimately came upon Airmule.
Wow, what an amazing story. And, backing up to the beginning of that story, I can relate a lot to what you were saying about growing up. Like, I grew up in, the same town. Like, my parents still live there. They will probably continue to live there until they die, type thing. And then I went to university about 30 minutes away from that. And I think for me, it's like coming out of university at 22 years old. I had some international travel experience and I had traveled a little bit, but I just felt this like strong need to get out of this little bubble that was like small town Alberta, Canada.
Yeah, exactly. When you kind of first left the country, was it on that 2-month trip after you had kind of taken a pause on your break, or had you been out of the country before that?
No, I had not. That was my first ever international trip. So I got my passport specifically for that 2-month trip. So I got the passport. A few months later, went on the trip. But I had traveled within the country, visiting some of the states. But I had never left the United States prior to my 2-month Euro trip.
Yeah, what was that like the first time, like touching down in a different country?
I still remember the face and the voice of the guy that I spoke with. It was very surreal. I was documenting everything. I'd like to say I'm an amateur photographer, but I'm probably not even qualified to say that. But I documented everything. So, I was taking all these beautiful photos, but it was a completely immersive experience. I had a friend, so my roommate actually, in the Bay Area beforehand, he had done something similar, and he was of great influence on me actually doing this myself, because he had done a 3-month trip, and he kept telling me before, he was, revving me up, like, you have no idea how much fun this is going to be. You need to remember every single moment, document what you do, talk about it. This is going to be something that you remember for the rest of your life, this and that. So it was a very surreal experience. It definitely ended way quicker than I would have liked it to, but it's really, really tough to put into words. It's just there's this emotional connection you get when you're sitting in a place that you've never been with people you've never met, and you're all having a good time, in Barcelona or in Paris or things of that nature. So a lot of the people that I met on that trip, I'm actually still friends with to this day. People that will, eventually, be, in my wedding whenever I get married or things of that nature. So it was a very heartwarming experience, to say the least. It was picturesque. It was beautiful, but it was emotionally, it meant a lot. It meant a lot to me.
So something that I'm really curious about and have kind of experienced, we've taken 2 longer trips ourselves, is that there's kind of this like slow unraveling process as you travel for a longer period of time. I feel like a lot of people don't ever experience, because if you go on a 2-week trip, you never really hit the point where you start to kind of have perspective on your day-to-day life. You kind of just get that first stage of like, whew, I can breathe again, and then you're jumping back into it. I'm curious what the timeline was like for you in that kind of like evolution. You say, that you came back feeling changed, but, was there a point in time in that trip where you started like reflecting back more on what life had been like in San Francisco, or how did it kind of evolve?
Yeah, so there was actually a timeline. So I was very fortunate along this trip to have met 3 separate groups of friends that were all also traveling in periods that I was traveling, and then my mother as well. So, and I think it was, it's every time I met one of my good groups of friends in another area. That bond was strengthened, and then it just sort of it brought into the, like you say, it brought the perspective back. So while I was there for 2 months, I had a very good friend of mine from college who, with some of his colleagues and his brother and his girlfriend and things of that nature, they actually were in Italy at the same time. So I planned my trip to be in Italy while they were there. So we all spent a week together in Italy, roaming through the various streets of, Rome and Florence and Venice and things of that nature. And I think it was at that moment that I really understood how that bond of traveling between people can really strengthen a friendship. It can really mean a lot. And so I started out, well, why is that? Why does this trip mean so much more to me? Because, with my buddy, I've been with him to football games before in the United States and things of that nature, but we had never really walked through Venice or walked through. So I started to look into, well, why is this? And then you start digging into, sharing the culture, sharing the experiences, realizing that, especially here in America, I am fully aware that Americans do tend to, have our heads up our own behinds sometimes, just with our own culture and with our own sort of, USA sort of attitude. So going to another country and actually visiting and seeing that there are so many other ways of living and so many other ways to do things, and how work is not the biggest thing. You go to Spain and they have the siesta. They couldn't care less, right?
Yeah.
The businesses shut down. They shut down around noon, and it's like here in the United States, that's asinine because people, well, we could be making money during that time. Like, yeah, well, I'd rather go hang out with my family. And then, as I said, throughout the trip, I ended up meeting up with my mother in Athens, and that was a really great experience. I ended up meeting with more friends in Barcelona for New Year's, which also happens to be my birthday. So that was another sort of fun experience as well. And then it was just all of the people that I met in between, combined with sharing sort of other foods and cultures and things of that nature with very good friends in other areas, really brought into perspective, like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want my life to be about. So how can I find a way to do that?
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny you bring up Spain and the siesta. I think we both had similar moments like that. We spent about a month in Spain and Portugal. And I remember one day we were in, I think it was Valencia, but we went out somewhere like,
I think
like
it was Cordoba.
like 8:45 or 9 a.m. and it was just ghost town.
Yeah.
It was like it was like being in Canada at like 6 a.m. Even probably like 5 a.m. There was just no one anywhere. It was like a Tuesday, and we're like, okay, it's just I guess no one gets up early.
Also, trying to get food during the siesta times, and it's like, we would always tend to eat we'd end up eating lunch, like wanting to eat at like 2:15, and it's like everything closed at 2 and there's nothing open till 4 and we're starving. I'm like, why are all these businesses closed? This is so ridiculous.
I'll never. Yeah, go ahead.
And then the other thing was, coming out of that experience, like over a month, you kind of just adjust to like the pace of things. And I remember we took a train from Lisbon to Paris. Well, we actually went to Bordeaux, but then we arrived in Paris, and people were just like moving so fast. And like, Paris, France doesn't have like a reputation for being like, nearly like New York or like hard driving as that, but still just like being there, you're in the train station, we're just kind of like, slothing around, and everyone's like walking around us and moving so quickly. I'm like, whoa, what's going on?
Yeah, Spain. I'll never forget this time. My buddies and I, it was the same exact situation. We were looking for a place to eat. We finally came across this one pizza shop, and just the very lackadaisical but friendly but family-like sort of vibe I got from the owner really impacted me, because we came in and we ordered some pizza, and he just brought it to our desk and or to our table. We tried to pay. He's like, don't worry about it. He's like, eat what you need. Just come see me afterwards. And I'm like, I just remember thinking to myself, that will never happen in America. Never will you go into a place and just, have some guy just sort of, don't worry about it. Just see me later, packed place and things of that nature. So it was a really interesting experience.
Yeah, it's always funny too when you get in those situations where it's like very culturally like norm there, but it's very different from what we're used to back home. But then it feels like we're doing something wrong, and then you're like, they're kind of looking at you like you're doing something wrong, and it's just kind of this confusing moment that you're having between with the interaction.
Yeah, exactly. So
when you were kind of well, actually, so I know you said you kind of went on like a sabbatical from your job. So was your plan always originally to go back to the same job afterwards?
Yeah, it was. When I got back, it was, so I was a contractor at Apple, and as a contractor, you are paid. So I was not a full-time employee, but I was paid hourly. So when you have these hourly sort of engagements in the Bay Area, a lot of tech companies are doing this. You don't necessarily have vacation time, but if you're not working, you don't get paid. So that's why it was a little easier for me to sort of go back to my boss. Say, look, I really would like to do this, and he was completely cool with it. So yeah, when I got back, I had full intentions of staying at the job. I had full intentions of working there, or excuse me, I should say, before the trip, I had full intentions of staying at the job and sort of seeing how my career would progress within, that company and those areas. But once I got back, like I said earlier, I couldn't have cared less about that, and immediately started trying to find ways to get out of that. And find a job that I was truly passionate about.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that experience as well. The first time we went backpacking, I actually had like a contract for a full-time job that had been a summer job that I'd worked for a couple years. And a couple months in, I knew that it wasn't the right fit for me. So I let them know that I actually wasn't going to be coming back there. And then the second time we left and went on a big backpacking trip, I actually asked my boss if I could have like a 6-month sabbatical, and they said no. And then when I got back, they were actually hiring for the same position again. So they asked me if I wanted the job back. But at that point I was like, oh, no, I don't want this job back. Like, I'm looking for something different now. So it's kind of interesting how, such a short period of time can really like shift your mindset. Like, what do you think for you was like the biggest shift, like in terms of what you were thinking around your career?
I think it was just the interactions that I had with the people, and seeing that, seeing that there was so much more to it. Like, seeing how happy a lot of these people were, also seeing how much you actually have here in the United States as compared to some other areas. But, ultimately what it really came down to is just seeing how much more there was out there. So, again, growing up in this bubble of the United States, especially within the United States, people don't tend to really think outside of the United States. Like, oh, where have you been this year? And people start listing the states. Oh, I went to Colorado. I was in Maine. I got to check out New Hampshire for the first time, right? And it's that whole, their bubble is all within sort of here within America, with the United States. And so when you get to see that there is so much more out there, and then you start realizing, I could travel every single day for the rest of my life and still see, not even see 25% of the world, or 25% of what's out there, or whatever. And so I think it was just that realization that you will never get to see everything. Life is incredibly short, right? Because combine it with the whole quarter life crisis, right? If that's even a real thing, but combine it with you starting to realize that I'm getting older, time is of the essence. I want to see as much as I possibly can, so I really need to make a shift now. And the other thing is, about traveling is I do think it's especially important now that I've done it. I do think it's especially important to do it during your youth, because that's the other aspect to this is I would eventually love, a family and kids and all of that. And unfortunately, taking a 3-month vacation when you have 2 toddlers is probably not going to be the most feasible solution. So it's also this realization that you want to do these things during a certain time period of your life that is very quickly dissipating, that is very quickly going away. Here I am, almost 29 years old. I could swear I was 18 yesterday. And so it's just realizing that there was so much more to see, and that, if you want to accomplish a lot of your life goals within that certain period of time, you gotta get on the horse as quickly as you can, as I guess they say.
Yeah. I mean, my 29th birthday is right around the corner here, so I definitely feel that as well. It's kind of interesting that you brought up the toddler thing because we actually have friends who travel with their toddlers. So I hope they're listening to this episode and they're like,
yeah.
Jared, we'll teach you how.
Yeah, please send. I would love to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, but I
So,
mean, it sounds like we've had like very similar time frames as well because I turned 25 on our 6-month backpacking trip to South America, which I think was a really big pivotal point for us. It was this time where we were like, wow, like, like we're like 25 years old, like we really need to, kind of figure out what we want to do and not just like
right?
be in soul sucking jobs until we're like 65 and retired. Like it's just not how this is gonna happen, and we're not gonna be happy doing it.
Yeah. I had this one college professor of every lesson, of every sort of statistic, of everything I've ever learned in college. This is the one thing that sticks out the most, which I think says a lot about me. But we come into class one day. He's like, kids, he used to start every day by saying, kids, I'm going to tell you, one day you're going to wake up and be 40. And he's like, you're not going to know how you got there, and you're not going to feel like it, but it's going to happen. And every day that passes, I hear that, ringing more and more true.
Yeah, it's a good like life mantra. I mean, I went to my 10-year high school reunion this summer and I was like, have I seriously been out of high school for 10 years? Like, what have I done in 10 years?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Of course, like, everyone's done a lot in 10 years. Like, it's so much time, but it just feels like it goes by so fast. And I don't know about for you, but I find that, the 2 years where we were working our corporate jobs and we weren't that fulfilled, like my social schedule was packed, like I was so busy, and I feel like it's just like I blinked and like 2 years passed and I was like, how have I been like in this job for 2 years and living in this apartment and feeling this way for so long and not doing anything about it?
Totally could not agree more.
And so when you return from that trip, you have this mindset shift. What were you thinking in terms of getting a new job? Like you knew that you wanted, or I guess a new career path, you could say, like you knew you didn't want to contract for Apple anymore. But what kind of like led you, I guess, to Airmule?
Yeah. So I'd like to think that I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I have a fairly entrepreneurial spirit. I would love to, create a company, start my own application, things of that nature. So the initial thing was, let me see if I can try and generate some income, on my own. Maybe provide some consulting services or, write for certain companies, things of that nature. So, I spun up a little LLC, a one-man LLC, and was basically, helping various companies out with their marketing and things of that nature, just doing my own. And it was okay. I made some money. Certainly didn't make anything to write home about, but I was also able to realize like, all right, this is not a scalable solution. It's like, I can do this, but this is also going to be the only thing that I end up doing for a considerable, portion of my life. And I really, really wanted a job that had travel incorporated into it. And so I started looking at startups, and I went to AngelList and, just type in the keyword travel and start seeing all of these various options pop up. And then, up came Airmule, read about it, ended up applying for the position, and the rest is history, as they say.
Oh, yeah. So, do you want to just like talk a little bit more about Airmule and how it got started and what kind of like the main idea is?
Sure. Yeah. So Airmule is an onboard courier platform, and for the listeners who aren't familiar with the phrase onboard courier, that is essentially anyone who gives up most or all of their excess luggage allowance in exchange for direct compensation or reduced airfare. In our case, we pay our couriers up to $500 per round trip. So if you're traveling with no checked bags or only one checked bag, you can basically list your trip on our platform and essentially sell your luggage space. The way it got started was our CEO, our co-founder and our CEO, Sean Yang. He was actually born in China, and this idea of flying as a courier in Southeastern Asia is much more prominent. In Southeastern Asia and India, actually, it's much more prominent than it is here in the United States. So he had grown up doing this for his friends and his family, and having his friends and his family do it for him. And then he came to the United States and served in the Army. And then after he left the Army, he started working with some startups, helping grow their Chinese user bases. And then he eventually came up with this idea, well, let's turn this whole idea of an onboard courier into a company. And I really, really love this story, because what he did was he calls out one of his friends, one of his buddies, and he's like, hey, look, I have this idea for a company. I want to visit all of these hostels and these local businesses, and I just want to ask people if this is something that at all be willing to do. So he creates this questionnaire. He prints it out on his own dime. He grabs his buddy. They get a camera. They start visiting all of these hostels in the Los Angeles area, and they're basically just going up to people and saying, hey, if I give you $5 to $10 and record an interview, would you mind answering some questions for me? And of course, at hostels, people are more than willing to do that. So he records enough answers to get a significant set of data. And then he takes that questionnaire and he approaches investors. He says, look, here are the answers. Here's the data. Here's the video. This is something that people are willing to do. Would you be interested in investing in the company? And then from there, Airmule was funded. Began operating in early 2016. We were founded late 2015, began operating in early 2016, and then I joined earlier this year, basically at the beginning of January 2017, December 2016. So yeah.
It's very cool concept. And I know when you talked before, you were like, yeah, this is kind of like an old idea. It's just not many people know about it, and it's not that popular here. It's also interesting because, Amanda and I spent last winter in Asia, and quite a few airlines are removing, on the budget side of things, are removing checked baggage allowances. But, for most of like the bigger airlines, longer trips, it's still there. But a lot of people pack, because, okay, we're going to Asia, we're going to be flying around on these discount airlines. Let's only bring, enough baggage that we can do carry on, so we can avoid fees on these smaller flights that we're taking. But then we've got, just that baggage allowance that we're not using on like big flights. So it's, it's a cool way where you could like actually, take advantage of that resource that you have.
Yeah, what we found, and you're absolutely right, airlines are fighting every single day to squeeze more and more profit out of their operations. But fortunately for international flights, because we are a service that is currently only available on international flights, but on most international flights, we found that almost every airline, with the exception of one, they'll actually give you 2 free checked bags. And so myself, I'm a light traveler. I preach it to my friends, travel as light as you can, bring only what you need. So every time I've ever flown between the US and China, I have never had a checked bag. I've never had one. And it's just sitting there. It's mine. It's available to use. So I figured, all right, why not make some money from it?
And so can you walk me through, so if I'm somebody who has something that needs to go from, say, Los Angeles to China, what does the process look for me as like a customer who's sending my stuff there?
Sure. So it is important to note that we're not a service that just any person can use. So in the example that you've given, just be able to use our service to ship something directly from the U.S. to China, just because there are some inherent security risks with that. So the shipper that is using our service is typically going to be a more established TSA certified shipping company. So what we'll do is we'll approach various shipping companies or various local shipping providers, and we'll say, hey, look, we have a service that can offer you a quicker turnaround time for a less amount of money, and then partner with them. And so then now what happens is those shipping partners' customers become sort of our customers, but it's through the shipping partner. We have that inherent sort of safety check there, because we don't just want anyone to be able to, download an app and then ship something with our service, because then that increases the chances of fraudulent activity.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And then, so from, the traveler standpoint, so if I sign up for Airmule and I'm traveling, like what does that kind of look like from the traveler perspective?
Yeah. So the registration's free. You just, go to the website, airmule.com, sign up. And then what you're doing is you list your trip, and listing the trip is basically just jotting down your itinerary. So what you're telling us is your departure time, your departure date, you're telling us the airline that you're flying, which airport are you departing from, which airport are you arriving in, things of that nature. That's really all you're doing. And then you select how many checked baggage slots you'll have available. So are you able to sell 1 or 2? We only allow 2 per leg at the moment. So the maximum you could courier with us is 4 per round trip. So you list that on our platform, and then that kind of goes into our atmosphere of available trips, if you will. So similar to when you request an Uber, you're not calling John to come and get you. What you're doing is you're placing a request that Uber then matches with a nearby driver. So when you list a trip on our platform, you are placing a request that our software, that our algorithms will then match with our shipping partners. And then once that whole process takes place, it's basically, a communication schedule. You've accepted the job as an onboard courier. So we'll contact the traveler. We'll let them know if they, have any questions, or we'll ask them if they have any questions or things of that nature. But on their day of departure, we'll meet them at the airport with their container or containers. We call them Airmule travel boxes internally. We meet them with their containers. They have an opportunity to inspect it if they'd like, but then afterwards they'll check it as any normal checked bag. So at that point, it's a pretty standard process. You'll fly as you will, and then it's the same exact process in reverse once you land. Go to baggage claim, retrieve it, exit through customs, and our staff are actually waiting in the airport for our travelers. So the really, really convenient part about this is that you never have to leave an airport to use our service. So you're not going to have to go an hour outside of the airport to pick up an item. You're just going to have to show up at the airport, meet our staff, and then once you land, meet our staff in the airport that you landed in.
Wow, that's really amazing. And so you have staff like all over the world then doing this, or are there only certain, airports and airlines that you guys use?
Yeah, so being that we're only available between the U.S. and China, it is a little bit easier, just because we don't have to have staff in Europe and India and things of that nature just yet. Hopefully, we will we'll be there soon. But we do have over 16 available airports, 17 now actually, 17 available airports in China and 7 here in the United States. And yes, we do have staff in all of these areas that are willing to meet our travelers. So it doesn't matter which airport you're going to. We have an FAQ on our site that basically tells you every single every single airport that we're available in. Any of those airports, the process is going to be the same. Staff is going to meet you regardless of which one you're flying from or which one you're flying to. The only real requirement is that you be flying between supported airports.
Okay, cool. What type of people are, I don't know if you call them mules, but air mule, the transporters? Is it backpackers, starting trips to Asia? Is it business people who are, just have like a quick trip? So they're like, oh, hey, I'm going to, make a bit of extra cash. Is it, people who maybe work over in the States but are going back home to China? What type of people are using the service?
Yeah, so we just refer to them as our couriers, our onboard couriers.
You don't call them your mules.
Yeah, exactly. We've had an X amount of increase in mules. No, we don't do anything like that. We just call them our onboard couriers. But we have 4 main sort of market demographics, if you will, of the people that are using our service. The first and largest is obviously the Chinese citizen or the Chinese individual, whether they were born in China or born in the United States. There are a lot of Chinese individuals in China and in the United States that are flying between the country. Either they live in China and they're coming to the United States to study for a semester, or their parents live in China and they live in the United States, so they're flying back home to meet their friends and to meet their family. So that's sort of one of the larger segments of our user base. But then we also have the mileage runner. So these are the people that will fly 15 hours just to hop on a plane and immediately hop on a plane back, because they're trying to keep their Premier Gold status for 2018. And so we have a lot of people that have viewed us as a way to earn easy miles, because especially in the fall time, but tickets between the U.S. and China, especially in the West Coast around fall, are actually pretty cheap. And we've had a lot of users who have made money on their flights. So their flight will have been $400 or $350 and then they'll earn $500. So they're actually getting paid. So they're viewing this as a way to just earn cheap miles. And then we have the business traveler, of course. I don't think I need to go into that. The U.S. and China have a very strong business relationship. There's a lot of business travelers flying between the U.S. and China. And then the last is, as you've alluded to already, the adventure seeker, the deal seeker, the individual who wants to see everywhere, but they're just looking for the best deal. Where can I go based on the budget that I have? And when China pops up as a very reasonably priced destination, they tend to come to us to use our service. So those are probably the four main people that are using our service currently.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I remember when we were booking our flights over to Asia, I guess last fall, the cheapest flight we found was actually through China on China Eastern, and we don't have a Chinese like tourist visas, so we didn't end up doing that. But I can imagine that would be, like there's a lot of people probably like us who were taking that cheap flight going over to China, and that's such a great way to like add, income onto your flight, like get paid to basically go to China.
Yeah, I think when we were looking, it was like $300 or something to fly to China.
Yeah, exactly. We had this. I had a conversation with a guy a few months ago, and he wanted to use our service every other day for an entire month. He wanted to use it every single day, but I was like, it's probably not going to be possible due to the time zones. But yeah, a lot of people are looking at this as an easy way to earn some income.
So do you have a lot of like returning customers then, like a lot of people who are just, continuing to do this?
We do. Yes. There are certain segments that see more of a higher return in frequency or more of a frequency and return than others. Obviously the mileage runners, because they typically just care about the miles. They don't really care where they're going. Chinese individuals, obviously they have to kind of go back and forth. But I think the biggest thing that's really pushing our growth lately has just been the fact that there are 1.4 billion people in China, right? So
yeah.
if you can capture 1% of the American audience, it's like, oh, congratulations. That's a very big company. But if you can capture 1% of the Chinese audience, right, you are one of the largest companies in the world. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do. We're not quite there yet, but we have a lot of referrals. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people share it. So that's probably been the biggest sort of boon to our growth so far.
Yeah, that's amazing.
There's something that, like, when I was looking at it, I'm like, okay, if I was to do this, what would that look like? Something that jumps to my mind is, border guards, customs agents usually aren't the friendliest people on earth. What's it like to take through a package that's not yours when you're going through that process?
So again, we instruct all of our couriers before they're about to do this. Whenever you are asked, did you pack this yourself? Do you know who packed this? Don't ever lie in that situation. Simply be upfront and honest and say, no, I did not pack this. I'm flying as an onboard courier. I myself have used our service 3 times, and I've been asked that question every single time. Did you pack this? And I've said, no, I didn't, but I'm flying as an onboard courier. As we kind of mentioned earlier in the show, this is an industry that has existed since the 50s. It's been around for a really, really long time. So this idea of an onboard courier is not new to airports or airline employees. So they understand what that means. The only thing that's a bit different than how it's existed is that we're one of the first companies that's really added this digital platform that makes the ability to fly as an onboard courier more accessible to everyone. So in the past, what happens is the onboard courier industry has typically served these very highly sensitive items. So let's say you're a factory and you have a very specific part that breaks and it's holding up the entire production line. So if you're losing X amount of dollars per hour that the factory is not running, you're not going to call FedEx, next day air, or things of that nature. You're going to spend a premium to get it there that day, to get it there in a few hours. And so that is how the traditional onboard courier industry has existed. So these companies, they'll call up their couriers and they'll say, we need you on a flight in an hour. Are you available? Yes, I am, right? And then they pay for the flight and things of that nature. So, hey, I'm flying as an onboard courier. Here's the paperwork, so on and so forth. We've just kind of flipped the model a bit on its head. And so now we're serving more traditional shipping companies, people that are shipping e-commerce items and things of that nature. But we're also just allowing anyone and everyone to do it. So it's not something that people haven't heard before when they're working at an airport. So as long as you're honest, they couldn't care less. Like I said, we've been doing this for almost 2 years. And so when they get there, if they're just, yes, I'm flying as an onboard courier. Yes, here's my paperwork. No, I did not pack this. Just be forthright, then it's not an issue at all.
Yeah. And so you guys do I guess you make sure that the packages that are going through are you're not trying to take monkeys to the United States from China or fresh fruit in or plants or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, starting at the very beginning of the process, we partner with TSA certified shipping companies. So that in itself is a bit of a sort of a safety check as well. But we also have a team that's dedicated to the manual hand inspection of every single item that comes through our doors. So we photograph and we document every single item so we know exactly the condition that was in, what we're looking at. Our travelers receive digital manifests so they can actually see exactly what's going to be in the containers. So that really sort of helps as well. But we also have an internal list of items that we do not allow, because people always like to ask the question, right? People always goes to, what about illicit substances or things of that nature? And it's not just that. There are other items that are not illegal that just aren't allowed into the country. Like you just said, fruits, things of that nature. So it's very important that we monitor these types of shipments and return them when they come through our door. So yeah, we do have a team that is dedicated to ensuring that every single item does fall within the confines of international transportation.
Yeah, that's good. I can imagine that there's some silly person out there who's like, I really want to bring this monkey back to the United States. I'll just send it with somebody else.
Yeah.
But I guess that's part of the whole process with not just allowing anyone to do it right from the get-go.
Exactly. And we don't do ourselves any favor with the name Airmule, but we like to have fun with it. So.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm curious. You left this job at Apple that you were feeling unfulfilled with. You went on this big trip. You came back. You tried freelancing. Now you've been with Airmule for about a year. You said, or I guess almost exactly a year. Are you feeling more fulfilled working for a travel startup than you were before?
Absolutely, 100%. 100%. I'm not a fan of when people say 110% because it's not a real thing, right? But in this instance, 110%. So yeah, it's really, when I grew up, I didn't grow up poor by any means, but international vacations can be quite expensive, and we weren't taking a lot of those growing up. I had a medium-sized family, and so the idea of getting 10, 15 people to go on a skiing trip to the Swiss Alps, it wasn't really an option for us. It didn't happen. So when we can help people who have may not have taken this trip if it were not for us, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Helping other people travel, people, especially with regard to China, just because, and I myself have fallen victim to this, but I had no idea how beautiful China actually was. I think China does tend to get a bad rap for, smog and things of that nature. But being that I'm in this space and you start looking at all of these exotic, beautiful destinations within China, we've been able to help a lot of people actually discover China, not just explore it, but discover it. They had no idea that some of these places even existed. So that has been really fulfilling as well. But then also, every single day we do get a lot of messages from people that say, this is an awesome idea. There are definitely the naysayers as well. There are probably just as many people that tell us that they hate us and they hate our name and we think we're stupid, right? But we do receive a lot of feedback from users that just say, this is a great idea. I love what you guys are doing in terms of that. And that is really, really fulfilling, because when you're a very small cog in a very large corporate machine, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis to maybe not in all positions, but at least in the one that I had, you just feel kind of useless. You're not really doing anything meaningful. And again, not to say that every position is that way, but just in mine, I particularly felt that way. So to be able to do something that is having an impact on the lives of others, it really does, it's, I don't know. I seem to not be able to come up with words there, but yeah, it does mean a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I think we both experienced too, is that working in a more entrepreneurial environment, like whether it's freelancing or working at a startup, there's a lot of like elements to what make travel exciting and fulfilling, that I feel like are there and exist in that entrepreneurial type of work. There's that slightly more of like a self-directed feeling to it. There's kind of the connection to the thing you're doing, the variability. There's definitely, especially if you're working in a startup, there's all sorts of new stuff like happening every day, new surprises and that type of thing. Is that kind of like it's maybe like a little bit abstract, but just to give you a bit more background, I feel like a lot of people go traveling, have a long-term trip and an experience where they say, wow, that was really impactful, that was really meaningful. And then they kind of just like dive back into a normal job, and then they feel dissatisfied, and then they save some money and they pendulum swing back the other way. And something I've kind of found is, you can kind of like create this life that kind of hits on those things that you can experience traveling. And obviously traveling is still amazing and still fun, but is that something that you connect with, that, some of that experience traveling, can you relate to that in your kind of entrepreneurial work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's using the prior example, my prior career path. If you would have asked me, hey, Jared, do you know what you'll be doing next week? Absolutely. I'll be putting this file in this folder, and I'll be taking that folder and putting it here. Right? I could have told you that weeks in advance, but with regard to this, with my current situation, hey, do you have any idea what you'll be doing tomorrow? Well, I have some idea, but I certainly don't know. Something might pop up. I might be doing an interview with fabulous hosts like you two, right? Things of this nature. So I completely agree, and you're totally right. When I recently went to Iceland, and one of the best parts of that trip to me, one of the parts that sticks out the most in my mind was the bus ride from the airport to Reykjavik, because you're looking at this beautiful, vast expanse of Iceland, and you have no idea what's coming for you. You have no idea what's ahead in the next 2 weeks. There's this adventure that awaits you. You don't know what you're going to see. You don't know how it's going to impact you, and that feeling of not knowing absolutely exists within the startup, because you don't know how well the company is going to perform. You don't know how well a particular campaign might go. You don't know, but you try it, you see how it works, and then you iterate on it, and it's a lot of fun. It's really, really fulfilling, especially when every day a lot of what I do is geared towards travel. Our Instagram, for example, is geared towards travel. So when myself and the team are curating Instagram pics, we're looking at nothing but Instagram travel pics from, like, that is awesome. I absolutely love doing that. Right. So it's little things like that just really make every day, more fulfilling than the previous.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's really interesting, like just looking at, hearing about your journey and then looking at ours as well. Like our podcast has really been kind of a documentation of the different, paths that we've gone down over the last couple of years. And I feel like we kind of went through a phase where we were like, anti-corporate and like don't work corporate jobs. But I think we've kind of, come to a place where we both work for like different corporations and a couple different companies, and I think we're both very fulfilled with that. But it was kind of almost like changing the context. Like I used to work for a business school, doing like program coordination, and Ryan used to do accounting for a commercial flooring company. And I think it was just really hard for us to connect with kind of the bigger picture and like, how are we actually changing the world and how are we impacting people? And of course, like those businesses have impacts, but I think for us, it was just like really hard to connect with them and then to draw a lot of meaning from that. And it's taken us a little bit to kind of find our footing with, we stand behind these companies. We believe in what they do. Like we believe in like what we do and that sort of thing. It sounds pretty similar with you and Airmule.
Yeah, completely. It's, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing every single corporate position that exists, right? Because I'm not. I will. There's a high likelihood that I eventually end up in one of those someday. Anyway, I think it's just more finding some purpose in the job that you're doing. So, for example, if Airmule grows and we become this large, multi-million-dollar corporation, and I'm still here, then I will there. I will be, I will be back in the corporate position, back in the corporate driver's seat, if you will. But I think it's just there's a bit more meaning behind it. What is Airmule trying to do? What is the mission of the company? How are you, directly contributing to that? And then if that's still there, and of course, if you can take considerable amount of vacation, then why not go for it? So
yeah, definitely. Amazing. So it's been so awesome talking with you today, Jared. Where can people go to find out more about yourself as well as Airmule?
Yeah, so you can just go to www.airmule.com and learn all you can about the company. So yeah.
And you guys are on Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing?
Yep, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. We're on all the socials. So yeah, come check us out.
Okay, amazing. We'll put links to those in the show notes, so listeners should definitely go and check that out. Thank you again for your time today, Jared. This has been super awesome.
No problem. Thank you so much, Ryan and Amanda. Really, really pleasure joining you two today.
Thanks, Jared.
All right, thanks. Have a good one.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.